The ice was a solid 2 inches thick across my driveway when I fired up the skid steer that Tuesday morning in January. And I had no idea that clearing it would turn into a legal nightmare that would eventually save our entire neighborhood. I had lived in Riverside Meadows, a housing development just outside Boulder, Colorado, for 3 years, and while the homeowner association had always been particular about things, nothing prepared me for what happened that morning. My name is Quentin Ingram, and I run a small landscaping business from my property. The skid steer was parked in my side yard, fully permitted and approved when I purchased the home. The machine was essential for my work, and when the ice storm hit the night before, leaving the entire street looking like a skating rink, I figured I would do everyone a favor and clear not just my driveway but the main road through our development too. I started at 6 in the morning, just as the sun was beginning to rise. The skid steer roared to life, its diesel engine cutting through the quiet morning air. I had a scraper blade attachment that worked perfectly for ice removal without damaging the asphalt underneath. Within 20 minutes, I had cleared my entire driveway and was working my way down the street, pushing the ice and snow to the sides where it would not block anyone's path. The machine hummed smoothly as I worked, and I noticed several neighbors peeking through their curtains, giving me thumbs up or grateful waves. Old Mr. Henderson from 2 houses down even came out in his bathrobe to thank me. His hip replacement surgery was just 2 months ago, and he had been dreading trying to navigate the ice. I was about halfway down the main road when I heard the voice. Sharp, shrill, and unmistakable even over the engine noise. Excuse me, what do you think you are doing?" I stopped the skid steer and looked toward the source of the commotion. Standing at the edge of her pristine lawn was Patricia Cunningham, the president of the Riverside Meadows HOA. She was in her late 40s, with that distinctive short haircut that somehow screamed entitlement, wearing a puffy winter coat and holding her phone like a weapon. I shut off the engine and climbed down from the cab. "Morning, Patricia. Just clearing the ice so people can get to work safely." Her face was already red, though whether from the cold or anger, I could not tell. "You are operating heavy machinery in a residential zone without proper authorization from the HOA board. This is a direct violation of Section 12, subsection 4 of our community guidelines." I stared at her for a moment, trying to process what she was saying. "Patricia, I am clearing ice. People need to get to work. The road is dangerous." "I do not care if you are building a golden bridge to heaven itself," she snapped. "You cannot operate commercial equipment in this neighborhood without written permission, submitted 14 days in advance. I am calling the police right now for illegal use of heavy machinery and disturbing the peace. It is 6:30 in the morning after an ice storm. I am helping people." But she was already dialing, her fingers jabbing at her phone with the fury of someone who had found their purpose in life. I watched in disbelief as she actually called the police, not just to complain, but with the tone of someone reporting a major crime. I climbed back into the skid steer, figuring I might as well finish what I started before any officers showed up, if they even bothered to come, which I doubted. Surely the police had better things to do than respond to an HOA president mad about ice removal. I was wrong. 20 minutes later, as I was clearing the last section near the development entrance, a Boulder County Sheriff's Department patrol car pulled up, lights flashing. A young deputy stepped out, looking confused and slightly annoyed. I shut off the machine again and climbed down, walking over to meet him. "Morning, officer. I am guessing Patricia called you," the deputy, whose nameplate read Morrison, nodded slowly. "I got a call about unauthorized heavy equipment operation in a residential area." Want to tell me what is going on?" I explained the situation while Patricia rushed over, nearly slipping on a patch of ice I had not yet cleared. She caught herself on a mailbox and then marched toward us with renewed determination. "Deputy, I want him cited immediately for violating our HOA regulations and for operating that monstrosity without proper permits," she demanded. Deputy Morrison looked at her, then at me, then at the now clear road behind us. "Madam, is he damaging any property?" "That is not the point. He is violating our community standards." "But is he damaging anything?" the deputy repeated, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Well, no, but the rules clearly state, Madam, HOA regulations are a civil matter, not a criminal one. I cannot cite someone for violating your HOA rules. If you have an issue with his actions, you need to take it up through your HOA procedures or civil court." Patricia's face went from red to purple. "Are you telling me you are not going to do anything?" "There is nothing to do. He is not breaking any laws. In fact, he is probably doing a public service clearing this ice." Deputy Morrison turned to me. "You do have the proper licensing for that equipment, right?" "Yes, sir. I run a landscaping business. Everything is registered and insured." "Then we are good here." He looked back at Patricia. "Madam, please do not call 911 for HOA disputes. This is not an appropriate use of emergency services." He got back in his patrol car and drove away, navigating easily over the clear pavement I had created. Patricia stood there, shaking with rage, staring at me like I had personally insulted her entire family line. "This is not over, Quentin. Not by a long shot. You will be hearing from our attorney, and there will be an emergency board meeting about your continued residence in this community. You cannot kick me out for clearing ice, Patricia. We will see about that." She stormed off, and I finished clearing the last bit of the entrance before heading home. I figured that would be the end of it, maybe a strongly worded letter or a fine that I would challenge. HOAs talked big but rarely followed through when someone stood up to them. I was so wrong about that too. The letter came 3 days later, delivered by certified mail. I had to sign for it, which should have been my first warning that this was serious. The envelope was thick, official-looking, with the HOA's letterhead embossed in gold. Inside was a notice of violation and a summons to appear before the HOA board in 1 week. The violation list was extensive: unauthorized use of commercial equipment, failure to obtain advance permission for property modifications, apparently clearing the street counted as a modification, disturbing the peace during quiet hours. 6:30 in the morning was apparently still quiet hours, though that had never been enforced before. And my personal favorite, creating a potential liability situation by altering the natural state of the roadway. That last one made my blood boil. I had made the road safer, and now I was being accused of creating liability by removing the ice. The letter also included notice of a special assessment against my property for $1,500 to cover the administrative costs of dealing with my violation. If I did not pay within 30 days, they would place a lien against my house. I called my attorney the next morning. Her name was Jennifer Martinez, and she had handled my business paperwork when I started my landscaping company. She listened to my story, asked for copies of all the documents, and then said the words every client loves to hear from their lawyer. "This is ridiculous, but it is going to cost money to fight." "How much money?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "Depends on how far they push it. If it goes to civil court, we are looking at potentially $5,000 to $10,000 in legal fees. HOAs can be incredibly vindictive, and they use homeowner dues to fund their legal battles. You will be paying out of pocket. So they can just bully people with legal fees. Unfortunately, yes. It is one of the major problems with HOA governance. They have a war chest of money from dues, and individual homeowners usually cannot afford to fight back. I thanked her and hung up, feeling the weight of the situation settling on my shoulders. $1,500 was bad enough, but the prospect of spending thousands more to defend myself for doing something helpful was infuriating. The board meeting was held on a Thursday evening at the community clubhouse. I showed up 15 minutes early and found that I was not the only one in trouble. 3 other homeowners were there, each clutching their own violation notices. One had painted her front door a slightly different shade of approved beige. Another had installed solar panels without permission. The third had committed the apparently heinous crime of planting roses in his front yard that were red instead of the approved pink or white. We sat in uncomfortable folding chairs while the board assembled at a long table at the front of the room. Patricia sat in the center, flanked by 4 other board members I vaguely recognized from neighborhood events. They all had that same expression of smug authority, like substitute teachers who had finally been given power over the students they once could not control. "This meeting of the Riverside Meadows HOA board will now come to order," Patricia announced, banging a gavel that seemed comically oversized for the occasion. "We have several violations to address this evening, and I expect all parties to conduct themselves respectfully and accept the board's decisions without argument." The other 3 homeowners went first. The woman with the door was fined $500 and ordered to repaint within 2 weeks. The solar panel guy was hit with a $2,000 fine and ordered to remove the panels entirely. When he protested that the panels were saving him money and helping the environment, Patricia cut him off. Our community standards exist for a reason. Solar panels are visually unappealing and decrease property values. The decision is final. The rose garden guy tried to argue that roses were roses, regardless of color, but he was fined $800 and given 1 week to replace them with approved colors. Then it was my turn. I walked to the front of the room, and Patricia's eyes gleamed with an unsettling satisfaction. She clearly had been looking forward to this. "Mr. Ingram, you are here regarding multiple serious violations that occurred on January 15th. The board has reviewed the evidence and witness statements." "Witness statements," I interrupted. "Who witnessed anything? I was clearing ice from a public road inside our development." "Mr. Ingram, you will speak when spoken to," Patricia snapped. "Multiple neighbors reported excessive noise, property damage concerns, and general disruption. Furthermore, you were operating commercial heavy equipment in a residential zone without proper authorization. I was helping people get to work safely. That is not for you to decide. The county maintains our roads, and if they felt ice removal was necessary, they would have handled it. The county does not maintain our roads. We do, through HOA dues. That is why we pay extra every year for road maintenance." Patricia's jaw tightened. I had caught her in an inconsistency, and she did not like it. Regardless of who maintains the roads, you do not have authority to modify them without permission. The board has decided to impose a fine of $3,000 for these violations, in addition to the $1,500 special assessment already levied. You have 30 days to pay, or we will place a lien on your property and begin foreclosure proceedings. The room went silent. $4,500 for clearing ice. I stood there trying to process the absurdity of it all. "This is insane," I said finally. "I helped people. I made the neighborhood safer. You violated clearly stated rules. The decision is final. Next time, perhaps you will think twice before acting unilaterally." I left the meeting in a daze. The other homeowners filed out with similar expressions of shock and anger, but none of us knew what to do. Fighting the HOA meant legal fees we could not afford. Paying the fines meant admitting we had done something wrong, which we had not. I called Jennifer again the next morning and told her everything. "They cannot actually foreclose over this," she said, though her tone suggested she was not entirely certain. "But they can make your life miserable, and fighting them will cost money. I can file a response to their fines and argue that they are excessive and punitive, but that means going to civil court." "Do it," I said. "I am not paying them $4,500 for helping my neighbors." "Quentin, I have to be honest with you. Even if we win, you will probably spend that much or more in legal fees. And if we lose, you will owe the fines plus legal costs. HOAs win these cases more often than you would think." "I do not care. This is not right." Jennifer drew up the paperwork, and we filed a response to the HOA's fines. We argued that the fines were excessive, that I had not violated any county or state laws, and that the HOA was overstepping its authority. We also pointed out that nowhere in the CC and Articles, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions that govern the neighborhood, was there any specific prohibition against ice removal using appropriate equipment. Patricia responded by doubling down. The HOA hired their own attorney, some guy named Richard Sterling, who apparently specialized in HOA law. He filed a motion claiming that I was in ongoing violation of community standards, that my landscaping business represented a commercial enterprise operating out of residential property, and that my equipment storage violated aesthetic guidelines. That last part was complete nonsense. When I bought the house, I had specifically verified with the HOA that my business use was acceptable. I had letters and emails confirming it. But Sterling argued that times change and community standards evolve, and what was acceptable 3 years ago was not acceptable now. The whole thing was spiraling into madness. We were headed for a court date in early March, and the legal fees were already climbing past $3,000. Then something interesting happened. It was late February, and another storm system was moving through Colorado. This one was worse than the January ice storm, bringing heavy snow and freezing temperatures. The forecast called for 15 inches of snow over 2 days, with wind chills dropping to 20 below zero. I was watching the weather report when my phone rang. I did not recognize the number, but I answered anyway. "Is this Quentin Ingram?" a deep voice asked. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Robert Chen. I am the sheriff for Boulder County. I understand you have experience with ice and snow removal using heavy equipment." I was quiet for a moment, confused about why the county sheriff was calling me. "Yes, I have a skid steer. I run a landscaping business." "Good. I am going to cut right to the chase, Mr. Ingram. This storm coming through is going to be bad. We are expecting whiteout conditions, and we have reports of several elderly residents in your area who have critical medical needs. If roads become impassable, we need to be able to reach them. The county's snow removal equipment is stretched thin, and we have multiple areas to cover. I am calling to ask if you would be willing to keep the main roads in your development clear during the storm as a contractor for the county." I almost laughed. "Sheriff, my HOA is currently suing me for clearing ice back in January. They fined me $4,500 for it." There was a pause. "I am aware of your situation. Deputy Morrison mentioned it. That is part of why I am calling. If you are working as a county contractor, your HOA cannot do anything about it. You would be performing essential services under county authority. We will pay you a fair rate, and you will have official documentation that supersedes any HOA regulations." "What about Patricia Cunningham? She is going to lose her mind. Miss Cunningham does not have authority over county emergency operations. If she interferes, she can be charged with obstruction. Are you willing to help?" I thought about Patricia's face when she found out. I thought about the other homeowners who would benefit from clear roads. I thought about the elderly residents who needed medical access. And yeah, I thought about the poetic justice of the situation. "Yes, Sheriff, I will do it." "Excellent. I will have the paperwork emailed to you within the hour. Standard contractor rate is $125 per hour plus fuel costs. Keep track of your hours and submit an invoice to the county when the storm passes. And Mr. Ingram, thank you. This really helps us out." The paperwork came through as promised. I printed it out, signed it, scanned it back, and then printed an extra copy to keep in the cab of my skid steer. If Patricia tried anything, I wanted proof that I was acting under county authority. The storm hit that night. By morning, there was already 8 inches of snow on the ground and more coming down hard. The wind was howling, creating drifts that were 3 feet high in places. I could barely see across the street. I bundled up, grabbed a thermos of coffee, and headed out to the skid steer. It started on the second try, diesel engines hating the cold, and I let it warm up for a few minutes before engaging the blade. I had swapped the scraper for a proper snow plow attachment, and it cut through the drifts like butter. I started with my street, clearing a path wide enough for emergency vehicles. Then I worked my way through the development, hitting all the main roads first. It was slow going in the heavy snow, but the skid steer was designed for this kind of work. I was about 2 hours in when I saw Patricia standing in her driveway, waving her arms at me. I considered just driving past, but I figured it was better to deal with her head-on. I stopped the machine and climbed down. "What do you think you are doing?" she screamed over the wind. Snow was already accumulating on her coat. "You are in direct violation of the board's ruling. I told you no heavy equipment." I pulled out the folded paper from my coat pocket and handed it to her. "I am working as a county contractor. Sheriff Chen hired me. This is official county business." She unfolded it, her gloved hands shaking either from cold or rage. Her eyes scanned the document, and I watched her face go through several stages of emotion. Confusion, anger, disbelief, and finally, a kind of desperate calculation. "This does not matter," she said finally, thrusting the paper back at me. "You still live in this community and you are still subject to our rules. I will have the sheriff's decision overturned. Good luck with that. In the meantime, I have work to do. People need these roads clear." I climbed back into the cab and continued working. Patricia stood there for a moment, then pulled out her phone. I knew she was calling someone, probably every board member, probably the HOA attorney, probably anyone who would listen to her complain. I spent the next 6 hours clearing roads. The snow kept falling, but I was able to maintain clear paths through the main sections of the development. Several neighbors came out to thank me, bringing hot coffee and sandwiches. Old Mr. Henderson stood on his porch and saluted me as I drove past. Around 3 in the afternoon, the Boulder County Sheriff's Department SUV pulled up next to me. Sheriff Chen himself stepped out, a tall Asian-American man in his 50s with a calm, authoritative presence. I stopped the skid steer and climbed down to meet him. "How is it going?" he asked. "Roads are clear. Snow is still coming down hard, but I can keep the main routes open." "Good work. I wanted to stop by personally to thank you and to let you know that I got an interesting phone call about an hour ago," I groaned. "Let me guess, Patricia Cunningham." He smiled slightly. "Among others. Apparently, the entire HOA board called the county commissioner's office to complain about my decision to hire you. They claimed I was overstepping my authority and interfering in internal community affairs. What did the commissioners say? They told the HOA board that emergency snow removal is county business, and that the sheriff's office has full authority to contract with whoever we need to maintain public safety. They also pointed out that your development's roads, while privately maintained during normal conditions, are considered public access roads for emergency services purposes. The HOA has no authority to prevent county contracted work. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. So I am good to keep working, more than good. You are helping us tremendously. We have 3 medical emergencies in this area alone that needed ambulance access, and your work made it possible for them to get through. Keep it up and submit your hours accurately. You have earned every penny. He got back in his SUV and drove off, and I returned to work. The storm continued through the night and into the next day. I worked in shifts, clearing roads for a few hours, going home to warm up and rest, then heading back out. By the time the snow finally stopped, we had received 18 inches, and I had logged 32 hours of work. I submitted my invoice to the county. 32 hours at $125 per hour, plus fuel costs, for a total of $4,200. The check arrived 2 weeks later with a thank you letter from Sheriff Chen, but the HOA was not done with me. Not even close. Patricia called an emergency board meeting the day after the storm ended. This time, the meeting was not just about my violations, but about what she called an ongoing pattern of disrespect for community standards and board authority. I showed up with Jennifer, my attorney. We had decided that every interaction with the board needed to be documented, and having legal representation present made that easier. The community clubhouse was more crowded than the last meeting. Word had spread about what was happening, and several neighbors showed up to support me. I recognized many of the people I had helped during the storm. Patricia banged her gavel, looking irritated at the crowd. This is a closed board meeting. Only board members, parties involved in violations, and their legal representation are allowed. Actually, Jennifer said, standing up, under Colorado HOA law, all board meetings must be open to homeowners unless they involve personnel matters or attorney-client privilege discussions. These homeowners have every right to be here. Patricia's face reddened, but she knew Jennifer was right. Fine. They can stay, but there will be no outbursts or interruptions. The meeting began with Patricia laying out what she called the facts of the situation. According to her version of events, I had deliberately and repeatedly violated HOA rules, had shown contempt for board authority, and had manipulated county officials into supporting my violations. That last part made several people in the audience gasp. I had not manipulated anyone. The sheriff had called me. Jennifer stood up. I would like to enter into the record the official county contract between Boulder County and my client, showing that he was acting under legitimate government authority during the recent storm. I would also like to note that the sheriff's office has sent a letter, which I have here, commending Mr. Ingram for his service and noting that his actions allowed emergency services to reach multiple residents who required medical assistance. She handed copies to each board member. Patricia barely glanced at hers before pushing it aside. That does not change the fact that he violated our rules in January, Patricia said. The fines stand, and we are here tonight to determine if additional sanctions are warranted, up to and including a lawsuit to force his compliance or termination of his residency. You cannot force someone to sell their home over snow removal, Jennifer countered. We can if there is a pattern of violations and refusal to follow community standards. The meeting devolved into legal arguments. Jennifer cited case law. The HOA attorney, Sterling, cited different case law. They went back and forth for over an hour while the audience watched like it was a tennis match. Finally, Mr. Henderson stood up. His voice was shaky but loud enough to cut through the arguments. "I have something to say, and you are all going to listen." Patricia tried to cut him off, but several other residents joined him, standing in solidarity. She reluctantly allowed him to speak. "I have lived in this neighborhood for 12 years, Mr. Henderson said. "I have watched this HOA board go from reasonable people trying to maintain property values to petty tyrants who care more about control than community. Quentin Ingram helped us during both storms. He made sure I could get to my doctor appointments. He made sure the Johnsons could get their daughter to the hospital when she had that allergic reaction. He made sure all of us could live our lives safely, and you are trying to punish him for it." Several people applauded. Patricia banged her gavel. "Mr. Henderson, your comments are noted but not relevant to the legal matters at hand." "The hell they are not. You are supposed to be working for us, the homeowners. Instead, you are working for your own ego. I move that we hold a vote of no confidence in this board." The room erupted. People were shouting, some in support of Mr. Henderson, others defending the board. Patricia banged her gavel repeatedly, her face now nearly purple with rage. "That is not how this works. You cannot just call for votes in the middle of a board meeting." Jennifer leaned over to me. "Actually, he can. Under your HOA bylaws, any homeowner can petition for a special election if they get signatures from 20% of residents. This is about to get very interesting." And interesting it got. Mr. Henderson, energized by the support, announced he would start a petition to remove the entire board and hold new elections. Within 3 days, he had the required signatures. Within a week, a special election was scheduled, but Patricia was not going down without a fight. In the days leading up to the election, the board sent out multiple mailings to every homeowner, warning about the dangers of removing experienced board members. They claimed that new leadership would lead to decreased property values, poor maintenance, and legal chaos. They also strongly implied that anyone who supported my reckless behavior was putting the entire community at risk. The campaign got nasty. Patricia and her supporters went door to door, spreading rumors about me. I heard through neighbors that she was telling people I was running an illegal business, that my equipment was dangerous, that I was trying to take over the HOA for my own financial benefit. None of it was true, but mud sticks, and some residents started to believe it. The development was splitting into factions, those who appreciated what I had done and wanted HOA reform, and those who believed in strict rule enforcement and saw me as a troublemaker. The election was held on a Saturday in late March. Every homeowner was allowed to vote for new board members or keep the existing board. Jennifer had helped us ensure the election followed proper procedures because we knew Patricia would challenge anything that was not perfectly by the book. The turnout was incredible. Nearly 90% of homeowners voted, compared to the usual 15 or 20% for HOA elections. The voting took place at the clubhouse, with independent monitors to ensure fairness. The results were announced that evening. Patricia and 3 of her board members were removed. 2 board members who had been relatively reasonable kept their positions. 5 new members were elected, including Mr. Henderson. Patricia did not take it well. She stood up in the middle of the announcement and declared the election invalid. She claimed voter fraud, procedural irregularities, and outside interference. When no one took her seriously, she stormed out, shouting that we would all regret this decision. The new board held their first meeting 2 days later. Their first order of business was reviewing all outstanding fines and violations. My case was the first one addressed. Mr. Henderson, now serving as the interim board president, motioned to dismiss all fines against me, noting that I had acted in the community's best interest and had subsequently been validated by county authorities. The motion passed unanimously. The fines were canceled, and a formal letter of apology was drafted and sent to me. They also reviewed the other violations from that original meeting. The woman with the wrong shade of beige on her door had her fine dismissed. The solar panel guy was given approval to keep his panels. The rose garden enthusiast was told his red roses were just fine. I thought that would be the end of it. The old board was gone, the fines were canceled, and the neighborhood was moving toward more reasonable governance. I should have known better. 2 weeks after the election, I got a call from Jennifer. Her voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "Quentin, we have a problem. Patricia Cunningham has filed a personal lawsuit against you." "For what?" "Defamation, harassment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. She is claiming that you orchestrated a campaign to remove her from the board, that you spread lies about her, and that the stress of the situation has caused her severe emotional harm. She is suing you for $250,000. I sat down heavily. That is insane. I did not do any of those things. I know, but she has filed the lawsuit and you will need to respond. This is going to get expensive, Quentin. We are talking depositions, discovery, possibly a trial. She clearly has money to burn and wants to make you suffer even if she does not win. Can she do that? Just sue me for whatever she wants." "Unfortunately, yes. Anyone can file a lawsuit. Whether it has merit is another question, but you still have to defend yourself. I would estimate we are looking at $20,000 to $30,000 in legal fees if this goes to trial." I felt sick. Even though I had won the county contract money, $30,000 would wipe out my savings and then some. Patricia knew that. She was weaponizing the legal system to punish me for standing up to her. Jennifer and I spent the next several weeks preparing a defense. We gathered statements from neighbors, documented everything that had happened, and built a case showing that Patricia's claims were baseless. She had not suffered any actual damages. Her removal from the board was the result of a legitimate democratic election. Nothing I had done constituted defamation or harassment, but the lawsuit moved forward anyway. Patricia's attorney, Sterling, was clearly billing her significant hours because the discovery requests were extensive. They wanted every email I had sent, every text message, every social media post. They wanted to depose every neighbor who had supported me. They wanted financial records for my business. It was harassment disguised as legal process, and there was nothing we could do except comply and rack up legal bills. The breaking point came during Patricia's deposition. Jennifer and I sat in Sterling's office while he questioned Patricia about her claims. She repeated her story about how I had orchestrated a campaign against her, how I had spread lies, how she had suffered immensely. Then Jennifer asked her a simple question. "Miss Cunningham, did you ever call the sheriff's office to try to have Mr. Ingram's county contract canceled?" Patricia hesitated. "I exercised my right as a citizen to express concerns to county officials." "Did you tell the sheriff that Mr. Ingram was dangerous and should not be allowed to operate heavy equipment?" I expressed legitimate safety concerns. "Did you file a formal complaint with the county commissioners claiming that Mr. Ingram had bribed Sheriff Chen to get the contract?" Patricia's face went pale. "I do not recall the exact wording of my complaint." Jennifer slid a document across the table. "This is a copy of your written complaint to the commissioners, obtained through a public records request. In it, You explicitly claim that Mr. Ingram bribed Sheriff Chen with an undisclosed amount of money to secure the snow removal contract. You provided no evidence for this claim because no such bribe occurred. This is defamation, Miss Cunningham. You accused my client of a crime with no basis in fact. The room went silent. Sterling was reading the document, and I could see his expression changing. He knew Patricia had just blown up her own case. "We will need to take a break," Sterling said. We resumed an hour later, and Sterling's tone had completely changed. He was no longer aggressive, instead asking softball questions that allowed Patricia to backtrack and clarify. But the damage was done. 2 weeks later, Sterling called Jennifer with a settlement offer. Patricia would drop her lawsuit if I agreed not to countersue for her defamatory statements to the county. No money would change hands, and both parties would release all claims. Jennifer asked for my input. We could countersue and probably win. But it would cost money, take time, and keep you tied up in this mess for another year. My recommendation is to take the settlement and move on. I agreed. The lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice, meaning Patricia could not refile. I was free and clear, but the whole experience had been exhausting and expensive. Even with the settlement, I was out over $15,000 in legal fees. But the story was not quite over. In late May, Sheriff Chen called me again. "Quentin, I wanted to give you a heads up about something. We have been investigating Patricia Cunningham." "For what?" "Financial irregularities related to the HOA. After she was removed from the board, the new board hired an accountant to review the HOA's finances. They found some concerning discrepancies and reported it to us. It looks like Miss Cunningham was embezzling money from the HOA for about 2 years. We are talking approximately $80,000. I was stunned. How did she hide it? Fake invoices for services that were never provided, overpayment to vendors with kickbacks, that sort of thing. It was fairly sophisticated, which is why it went undetected for so long. But the new board's accountant found it. We have enough evidence to press charges. What happens now? We will be arresting her this week. I wanted you to know because this might come up in the media, and your name will likely be mentioned as the person whose actions ultimately led to her removal and the discovery of the embezzlement. I want to make sure you are prepared for that. Thank you, Sheriff. I appreciate the warning. Patricia Cunningham was arrested on a Tuesday morning. The local news covered it extensively because HOA embezzlement cases were relatively rare, and this one involved a significant amount of money. Several news outlets contacted me for comment, but on Jennifer's advice, I declined to speak publicly. Patricia was charged with theft, embezzlement, and multiple counts of fraud. The case moved through the court system over the following months. The HOA joined as a plaintiff in the criminal case, seeking restitution for the stolen funds. In September, Patricia pleaded guilty to reduced charges in exchange for a plea deal. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 months. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, though given her legal bills and the cost of her own defense, it was unclear how much the HOA would actually recover. The new HOA board used the case as an opportunity to completely reform how the association operated. They implemented transparent accounting, regular audits, and term limits for board members. They also revised the CC and Articus to be more reasonable, removing many of the petty restrictions that had made life difficult for residents. By winter, Riverside Meadows was a completely different place. Neighbors were friendlier. People actually attended board meetings because they trusted the process. The community felt like a community again, rather than a dictatorship. When the first snow of the season fell in December, the new board president, Mr. Henderson, called me personally. "Quentin, we have a storm coming through this weekend. Would you be willing to clear the roads for the HOA? We will pay you a fair rate, and we will make sure everything is properly documented and approved in advance." "I would be happy to, Mr. Henderson. And Quentin, thank you for everything. You stood up when a lot of people would have just paid the fines and kept their heads down. This community is better because of it." That Saturday, I fired up the skid steer and cleared the roads. Several neighbors came out to watch and wave. A few brought coffee and snacks. It felt good to be helping without looking over my shoulder for someone ready to call the cops. The sheriff's department drove through at one point, and the deputy, Morrison, the same one who had responded to Patricia's original complaint, stopped to chat. "Heard you are doing this officially now," he said. "Yeah, the new board actually appreciates it," he laughed. "Good for you, man. And hey, thanks for helping out during that big storm. My grandparents live in this development. You cleared their street, and it meant they could get to their doctor appointments. They talk about you like you are some kind of hero. Just doing my part." He drove off, and I got back to work. The snow was not as heavy as the big storm, but it still needed clearing. I worked steadily through the morning, and by early afternoon, every main road in the development was clear. As I was finishing up, I saw a figure standing at the end of my driveway. It was a woman I had not met before, probably in her 30s, bundled up against the cold. I shut off the skid steer and climbed down. "Can I help you? Are you Quentin Ingram?" she asked. "That is me." "My name is Zara Thompson. I am a reporter for the Boulder Daily Camera. I have been following the story of what happened with your HOA, and I would like to do a feature article about it. Would you be willing to talk to me?" I hesitated. The whole ordeal had been exhausting, and part of me just wanted to move on. But another part recognized that this story was bigger than just me. HOA abuse was a real problem across the country, and if my experience could help other people understand what can go wrong and how to stand up to it, maybe it was worth sharing. "Okay," I said finally. "Let me finish up here and we can talk." Zara and I met at a coffee shop that afternoon. She had done her homework, having reviewed court documents, interviewed neighbors, and even obtained copies of the HOA's old violation notices. Her questions were thoughtful and fair, focusing not just on the drama but on the systemic issues that allowed someone like Patricia to abuse her position. The article ran 2 weeks later, on the front page of the local section. It was titled, "How One Homeowner Took on His HOA and Uncovered Corruption." The story laid out everything that had happened, from the initial ice clearing to Patricia's arrest. It quoted Mr. Henderson, Sheriff Chen, and several other neighbors who had been affected by the old board's overreach. The article generated significant interest. Other news outlets picked it up. I did a few radio interviews and one television appearance on a local news program. The story resonated with people because nearly everyone had either experienced HOA issues themselves or knew someone who had. Most importantly, the article led to legislative interest. A state representative named Michael Dorsey reached out to me and asked if I would be willing to testify before a committee considering HOA reform legislation. The proposed bill would place limits on HOA fines, require greater financial transparency, and make it easier for homeowners to challenge unreasonable restrictions. I testified in March, exactly 1 year after the special election that had removed Patricia from power. I told my story to a room full of legislators, explaining how a simple act of helping neighbors had spiraled into a legal nightmare. I talked about the power imbalances between HOAs and individual homeowners, and how easy it was for bad actors to abuse their positions. The bill passed both houses of the Colorado legislature, and was signed into law by the governor in May. It was not a perfect solution to all HOA problems, but it was a step in the right direction. Homeowners across the state would have stronger protections and more recourse when their HOAs overstepped. By the time the second anniversary of the original ice storm rolled around, life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. My landscaping business was thriving, partially because of the publicity from the HOA saga. The Riverside Meadows development was well managed and pleasant to live in. Patricia was serving her prison sentence, and the embezzled funds were being recovered through asset seizures and payment plans. I was out in my yard one Saturday afternoon, working on some early spring cleanup when Mr. Henderson walked over. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Of course. What is on your mind? The board has been talking, and we have a proposal for you. We would like to hire you as the official landscaping and maintenance contractor for the HOA. Not just snow removal, but year-round maintenance. We know you do good work, you are reliable, and you actually care about this community. What do you say?" It was a generous offer and would provide steady income for my business. But more than that, it represented how far things had come. From being threatened with foreclosure over clearing ice to being offered a major contract, the transformation was remarkable. "I would be honored," I said. We shook hands and Mr. Henderson smiled. "You know, when I moved here 12 years ago, I thought HOAs were a good idea, keeping property values up, maintaining standards, that sort of thing. But somewhere along the way, it became more about control than community. What you did, standing up to Patricia and that board, reminded everyone what this is supposed to be about. People living together, helping each other, making this a good place to raise families and build lives. So thank you for that." "I just cleared some ice," I said. "You did a lot more than that, and you know it." He was right, of course. That morning when I fired up the skid steer to clear the ice, I had no idea what I was starting. But looking back, I would not change anything. Standing up to bullies, even when it costs something, is always worth it. And sometimes, doing the right thing leads to better outcomes than you could have imagined. The next winter was mild, without major storms. My skid steer sat quietly in the side yard, ready but not needed. The HOA paid me a retainer as part of our new contract, so I was compensated even without significant snow removal work. I handled routine landscaping, kept the common areas looking nice, and helped out neighbors when they needed it. Life was good. The community was healthy. And every time I drove past the spot where Patricia had stood in the snow, demanding I stop clearing ice, I smiled a little. Sometimes the right thing to do is also the most satisfying, especially when justice eventually finds its way home. The story became something of a legend in Boulder County. Other HOAs referenced it when considering their own governance structures. Homeowners facing similar issues reached out to me for advice. I always told them the same thing: document everything, know your rights, and do not be afraid to stand up for what is right. It might cost something in the short term, but living under tyranny costs more in the long run. And that skid steer, the machine that started it all, became something of a mascot for the development. Kids would wave at it when they walked past. Neighbors joked about nominating it for the HOA board. It was just a piece of equipment, but it represented something important: the willingness to help others, even when someone tries to punish you for it. Years from now, when people ask me about the craziest thing that ever happened to me, I will tell them about the time an HOA called the cops because I cleared ice, and how that simple act of neighborly help uncovered corruption, reformed an entire community, and changed state law. I will tell them about Patricia Cunningham, who let power go to her head and ended up in prison for it. I will tell them about Mr. Henderson, who found his courage at 70 years old and led a revolution. And I will tell them about Sheriff Chen, who understood that sometimes the right thing to do is support the people trying to help, even when the bureaucracy says otherwise. But mostly, I will tell them about the importance of community. Real community where people look out for each other, help when they can, and stand together against those who abuse authority. That is what Riverside Meadows became, and it all started with a skid steer, 2 inches of ice, and a refusal to back down from what was right. The final piece of the story came that summer when Patricia was released on parole after serving 18 months. She moved out of state, and as far as I know, nobody from Riverside Meadows ever heard from her again. The house she had lived in sold quickly to a young family with 2 kids. They were friendly, involved in the community, and appreciated that the HOA board was reasonable and focused on actual community building rather than petty enforcement. I saw them one afternoon struggling to level out their backyard for a swing set. I walked over and offered to bring the skid steer over to help. They looked nervous, probably worried about HOA rules, but I smiled and told them not to worry. "New board, new rules," I said. "Around here we help each other out." The father, whose name was David, shook my hand gratefully. "I heard about what happened with the old board. That was some crazy stuff." It was, but it worked out in the end. That is what matters. I brought the skid steer over that evening and helped them grade their backyard. The whole thing took about an hour, and by the time we were done, they had a perfect level surface for their kids to play on. They invited me to stay for dinner, and I accepted. We sat on their back porch, grilling burgers and watching their kids play, and I realized this was what I had been fighting for all along. Not the right to operate my equipment or the principle of the thing, though those mattered too. I had been fighting for the simple ability to be a good neighbor without someone in a position of petty authority making it impossible. The freedom to help without fear. The chance to build a real community rather than just exist in a collection of houses governed by arbitrary rules. Riverside Meadows gave me that eventually. It cost time, money, and stress, but we got there. And every time I fire up that skid steer now, whether to clear snow, move dirt, or help a neighbor with a project, I remember where we started and appreciate where we ended up. The ice storm that started everything was just weather. Patricia Cunningham was just one power-hungry person. The HOA was just an organization. But together, those elements created a test, and our community passed it. We stood up, fought back, and built something better from the ruins of what came before. That is the real story. Not about conflict, though there was plenty of that. Not about vindication, though that felt good. The real story is about a group of people who decided they deserved better and were willing to work for it. About a community that remembered it was made up of individuals who deserved respect and dignity. About the simple truth that helping your neighbors should never be a crime, no matter what the rules say. And on cold winter mornings, when the snow falls heavy and the roads need clearing, I still fire up that skid steer and get to work. Because that is what neighbors do. That is what community means. And nobody, not Patricia, not any HOA board, not anyone, can take that away.